Ninakuabudu, wewe ni Mungu mkuu. Ninakuabudu, wastahili.
Greetings and shalom. My name is Pastor Mzungu from Nairobi, Kenya. I work with Baptist Chapel, and by extension, I serve with International Training and Equipping Ministries, ITEM. Today, I'm glad to bring you a presentation on the subject matter, the neglected voices of Africa. To be specific, I'll be focusing on how does the African context inform your approach to making disciples of Jesus. In my presentation layout, I have about 5 sessions. I'll be giving you an introductory part on the whole concept of discipleship. I'll be looking at discipleship in a holistic view. Then I will narrow down to the African context of discipleship. I will also look at what I term as contextual philosophies and beliefs and practices, which plays a major role in the making of a disciple. I will also share with you recommended strategies, and then I will wrap it up. So to begin with, let me begin with the introduction. The task of making disciples can sometimes be complicated, depending on the environment and the communities involved. It is important and paramount to understand that the African environment has several attributes that make the work of making disciples in the continent practically different and difficult from where it appears in places like Europe and the America. In my service with ITEM, I have been exposed to the reality in the midst of the communities that I serve. Even though from Africa and serving in Kenya, I don't take it for granted. There's an escalating demand of people and information that can turn willing Africans into effective and faithful disciples, as evidenced by the recent growth in believers' population in the continent. Discipleship as a concept has the potential of creating solutions to some forms of challenges that currently face the continent, including the widespread of poverty, illiteracy, diseases, and political and social instability. In the African context, the cultural practices, historical experiences, not to mention the contemporary experiences of the indigenous communities, must be put into consideration in the process of making discipleship. An approach to discipleship without a concern for the cultural history of a people is a missed target. So, let me try to bring about the discipleship in a holistic point of view. Ideally, discipleship are mandated to emulate their trainers and their teachers. Any disciple who is made has one big role and expectation to be more like their own teacher. Ultimately, disciples seek to become like their teachers and to carry on the mantle of discipleship by recruiting their own disciples, meaning the multiplication factor is involved. In the Christian context, discipleship or disciple making seek to learn from Christ and emulate his character with the hope of being transformed into his nature. The theological acceptable definition of a disciple of Christ is therefore a person who is being trained with an intention and the purpose of being transformed into Christ likeness. Discipleship as a faculty may attract learners of all levels. Christians have the spiritual privilege to join Christ in turning disciples towards being Christ-like. Therefore, Christ gave the greatest mandate, which is admirable by many in the book of Matthew 28 verses 19. Go ye therefore and make disciples. The work of making disciples involves converting sinners and educating and training converts to gain spiritual maturity. In my service with International Training Ministries, this has been the main goal. We have a slogan which normally guides us, whereby we say, Christianity in Africa is 100-fold wide, but an inch deep. Meaning, a lot of soul winning is done, but little is taken into consideration when it comes to discipleship. So it is important for us to understand, it must be very clearly understood that it is God who saves sinners and through the Holy Spirit grows believers into maturity. Believers who receive the grace to do the work of teaching, guiding and leading the churches must view their call as a privilege. Essentially, preachers and churches are supposed to train people how to come to Christ, listen to Him, observe Him, study Him, and ask Him for guidance, knowledge, and power to become more like Him, transforming into being disciples. The church leaders who participate in the work of creating disciples must therefore always show appreciation and humility in their work by allowing Christ to be at the helm. This requires that the church leaders and preachers first seek to become faithful and effective disciples before engaging in the discipleship making process or work. So what is the African context that informs us on how we can be able to be good discipleship makers? It is of vast importance for everybody to understand that the social, economical, and political and spiritual attributes of Africans are uniquely different from other continents from the perspective of church leader or ministry workers. Widespread poverty and other forms of social sustainability or instability, including gender equality, high illiteracy levels, terrorism, tribalism, human rights, or what we can term as human abuse, and food and water shortage also makes Africa unique. Despite these and other challenges, however, many African communities are hospitable. Spirituality has a special meaning in the judgment of many Africans. A particularly powerful force in African culture is what I can term as Ubuntu. Cultural values guide almost every aspect of African livelihood, including work, family, religion, and spiritual social life and relationship. You can never go an inch or a step in the African lifestyle without mentioning their cultural diversity. Just because you serve in Kenya, it does not necessarily mean that you can be able to venture anywhere. The uniqueness and the contribution of this culture are very key in the making of a disciple. Many Africans are practically open to spirituality and religious discourses, but caution has to be taken whenever one approaches them. Among the cultural dimensions that fit the African continent includes assertiveness, high power distance, low agularism, strong humanness, and collectiveness. Religion and spiritual practices remain at the core of daily lives of many Africans. That to say, it is almost impossible for you to separate an African and their cultural practices. In the sub-Saharan region, for example, indigenous religions compete with Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and other religions, for they are considered to be foreign ideologies. A notable portion of the indigenous people claim to have no religion or to have religions that are unique from them. With just about half of the total population of Africans professing Christianity, the current generations of believers have immense responsibility of converting sinners and shepherding believers in Africa. Therefore, the African religion has potential for advancing the population and interest of the church at the global level. So, the third thing that is very key to consider in the making of a disciple is what I would say is contextual philosophies, beliefs, and practices. There are a number of philosophies, value system, and belief system, and cultural practices that are unique to Africans and which might have impact on the work of preaching and teaching and shepherding believers. Without a proper understanding of beliefs, philosophies, practices, and values that govern the livelihoods of African people, a minister may fail to achieve an excellence discipleship program or fail in implementing the discipleship mandate. Some philosophies like Ubuntu, just as I have shared, Harambee, and African socialism play powerful roles in the livelihood of many individuals and communities in Africa. Many African communities have background in socialist systems that encourage sharing, collaboration, relationship, building a collectivism, and social interest. The socialism ideology in Africa dictates the model of life and defines the differences between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. In my involvement in the making of the discipleship programs down in Africa, especially in the coastal region of Kenya, this is a practical thing that you have to put into mind. For example, sharing a meal, a joke, and sometimes sharing even personal problems amidst them shows a more concerned attitude towards them. A commonly ignored factor in African context is the continent's experience with the historical colonialism. African nations, with the expectation or with the exception of Ethiopians and Liberians, have had their experiences with European occupation and colonialism. This is a factor that you cannot ignore whenever you interact with them. As an outsider, some scholars and political leaders have had huge arguments that colonialism persists in different forms of new colonialism and continues to be used by foreigners to exploit and shortchange the indigenous communities in the different aspects of livelihood. Because of the continent's experience with colonialism and new colonialism, there are some tendencies by local groups to oppose alien ideology and beliefs. Therefore, to some extent, opposition to Western cultures and ideologies can sometimes be extended to religion. A significant population of Africans' view on Christianity as an extension of European culture is a reality. Many institutions, including governments and private enterprises, have traditionally exploited the socialist aspects of African culture to achieve their goals. So, this begs a big question. How do we venture and how do we get informed on the best way and practices to ensure that we have a successful and an ongoing growth pattern of disciples? So here are a few recommendations that I would like to share with us. First, it is important that evangelism learn the culture of the indigenous communities to prevent getting into conflict with the tradition and dominating beliefs of the indigenous people. In my service with international training and equipping ministries, they have committed to empowering the locals to ensure that they carry on the mandate of both reaching out to pastors, equipping them with the intention of allowing them to disciple their own. Cultural structures can help to organize ministry work and to design church missions with greater efficiency. By demonstrating respect for indigenous culture and using the cultural infrastructure positively, the church and the leaders can be accepted as friends of the community. Converting and training Africans on spiritual matters can be meaningful if the church can present itself as a source of solution to some of the problems that continue to confront many African communities. On top of bringing aid and championing for justice, the church should actively be involved in empowering communities as individuals, enabling them to be able to enable themselves and enable those surrounding them. One of the most effective ways of empowering African provision of apprenticeship, let me repeat that. One of the most effective ways of empowering Africans is the provision of apprenticeship program that help the indigenous people to achieve economic and social progress. Effective apprenticeship programs must seek to provide intellectual, professional, behavioral skills on the lives of Africans. In a practical sense, most of the time when I'm doing my trainings under the banner of item, you will find that most of the pastors and leaders are illiterate, unable to read. Bringing an individual to a level of being able to understand biblical concepts in their own little way, it can be a very effective way of making disciples. Therefore, it is impossible that evangelists and churches operating in Africa will face It is possible that evangelists and church operating in Africa will face shortage of resources. Because of the widespread poverty, many Africans can be challenged and become incapable of providing adequate financial support for their evangelical work and discipleship programs. Churches and their leaders must be creative in mobilizing the resources of financing, preaching, and training programs. The cultural infrastructures of Africa can be instrumental in mobilizing support for the church projects and activities. Therefore, in my conclusion, I would like to submit, making disciples among Africans can be complicated because of their unique nature and their African environment. Because of their strong values of culture, their numerous socio-economical and socio-political challenges, and their experiences with colonialism, Africans are unique people. To make effective disciples in Africa, the church must present itself as a source of solution to the socio-economical challenges facing Africans. Cultural resources can be of great assistance to evangelistic programs who wish to achieve great results speedily. Because of their strong commitment to spirituality, many Africans have potential to grow into Christ-likeness and Christ-like beings if trained and empowered effectively, without demeaning them in any way, but rather using their weaknesses, turning them to their own advantage and impacting them. That way, we can be able to solve the problem on the neglected voices of Africa. Thank you, and God bless you.
Ninakuabudu